So there are two theories for how the gas giants formed. One is the same theory I showed you just now, core accretion, right? And the other is called disk instability. And one of our colleagues at DTM has done a lot of work on that. And so it's unclear exactly how they formed, but you're right, what we're trying to do, the reason we're trying to get to higher and higher pressure in the lab is because we're trying to understand more about the pressure inside the gas giants. It's thought that the gas giants also have a metallic core, but maybe a metallic core not made of iron. Hydrogen, for example, becomes metallic at a certain pressure, okay? So it's very possible that the insides of these planets could have metallic cores, could have hydrogen cores, could have rocky portions. We're not sure, but the higher pressure we can get in the lab, the higher the pressure we can get in the lab, the closer we can get to understanding the interiors of the gas giants and the exoplanets that are so big.
There are two types of theories for the formation of giants. One is called core accretion and the second theory is called disk instability. DTM has done a lot of work in the reason for trying to get the higher pressure in the lab because they are trying to understand the pressure which is inside the gas giants. Gas giants also have a metallic core, but it's not made of iron. For example, hydrogen becomes metallic at a certain pressure, so it is possible that the insides of these planets could have metallic cores, hydrogen cores, and also have rocky portions, but the interiors of the gas giants and the exoplanet that are so big.
Hello everyone. Today's lecture is about setting up a website. I'm going to be focusing on things that you need to consider to ensure your website really adds value to the people using it. So, there are three main areas you need to think about. The first and most important thing is who is your target audience. When you're creating a new website, you really need to think about who the users are and what information they'll be looking for. What we do when we set up websites is to group users based on their needs. So, for a website in the academic community, for example, we may have groups such as researchers and administrators, and this helps us design the site and add information that is relevant to each group. The second point is accessibility. The main thing here is to ensure your website can be found. And you can do this by making sure it can be reached from areas on the web where your target audience are also active. So this may mean providing links on other websites or maybe using social media. And thirdly, retention. Making sure your target audience return to your website regularly. You do this by ensuring it gives them a reason to come back, so it's important to keep the site up to date and make sure it provides the latest news and interesting information and so on.
There are several things that a person needs to consider to ensure while setting up a website. The first and foremost important thing is your target audience. While creating a website, you need to think about what actually user wants, and this helps to design the site and add relevant information. The second point is accessibility, where your target audience is also active. That means providing the links on other websites or social media. And finally, retention is important to keep the site up to date and make sure that it provides the latest news and interesting information related to everything.
Supersymmetry is a mathematical idea that people have developed in effort to understand the sharpest organizing principle for the fundamental constituents of matter. You see, we have learned that particles that seem to be different can actually secretly be united by certain symmetry principles. So we're used to the fact that there are symmetric objects in the world, like a sphere or a basketball. You turn a sphere, and even though you've transformed it, it looks the same, fundamentally. We found that certain particles, when you transform one particle into another, even though it looks like the identity of the particle has changed, overall the equations describing it, they don't change at all, an underlying level of symmetry. But what we've not been able to do is find a symmetry that would relate certain kinds of particles, namely matter particles and force particles. Matter particles are particles like electrons and muons, quarks. Force particles are like photons and gluons and WZ bosons. Supersymmetry is a symmetry that actually relates these two kinds, these two classes of particles. And people have proven that supersymmetry is the last possible symmetry of the fundamental particles that our mathematics, reality, has not yet been shown to make use of. So people are now trying to see whether that symmetry might actually be at work in the world. Can we find evidence for it in our understanding of the fundamental particles?
Supersymmetry is a mathematical idea in which people have to develop an effort to understand the sharpest organizing principles. There are symmetric objects in the world such as sphere and basketball. There are certain particles, when a person transforms one particle into another, even though looks like the identity of the particles has changed. Supersymmetry relates to two kinds and also have proven that this is the last possible symmetry of the fundamental particles that are mathematics, but reality has not been shown to make use.
From reading philosophy, I came up with three principles as the guiding principles for a just city. The principles of equity, democracy, and diversity. These were derived from the works of a number of philosophers, most preeminently, I suppose, John Rawls. My choice of the word equity rather than equality is in fact based on Rawls's argument that a policy ought to distribute benefits to people where the worst off become better off. So the worst off don't have to become equal to everybody else, but no policy should in fact make those who are most disadvantaged more disadvantaged. And it means that we have to talk about the policy at the time it's being enacted. To say, well, we have to make our city more competitive because sometime in the by and by, the benefits will trickle down to those people who are worst off, doesn't justify making them worst off at the time. We have a lot of examples in the world of people whose homes were destroyed in the name of the greater good and said, well, eventually they will benefit. But equity means that you do not, in fact, take advantage of those people who are weakest.
There are main three guiding principles such as equity, democracy, and diversity. The speaker's main choice of the word equity rather than equality because this policy ought to distribute the benefits to people who are the worst off and do not have to become equal to everybody, but there is no other policy that has more disadvantages. The benefits will trickle down to those people who are worst off and does not justify making them worst off. But equity means that do not take any advantage of those people who are weakest.
In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about changes in air pollution since the middle of the last century and what has created these changes. So, by the 1950s, air pollution was very visible, with frequent thick black fogs known as smogs in many large cities around the world. The main source of this pollution was from factories, and it caused severe health problems. For example, a particularly severe smog in London in 1952 caused over 4,000 deaths. Obviously, something had to be done, and in 1956, a Clean Air Act was introduced in Britain. This addressed the pollution from factories, and the smog soon disappeared. However, as you know, these days air pollution is still a big issue. The main difference between now and the 1950s is that you can't see it, it's invisible. Also, the main source of pollution now is from cars and lorries, and although these don't produce visible signs, this air pollution is still a significant risk to health. And one of the key factors in the rise of this type of pollution is that we have all become much more vehicle dependent. There are far more cars and lorries, trains and planes than in the 1950s, and this is now the main source of air pollution around the world.
The lecture was discussing the difference between air pollution in the 1950s and in recent years. She explained that in the 1950s, factories were the main source of air pollution, releasing visible black smoke and fog, which caused many diseases and even death. However, they stopped after imposing Clean Act regulation. She also mentioned that these days, the source of air pollution has been changed and people are still struggling with new invisible pollution released from cars and lorries because people are more vehicle dependent.
Thermodynamics. All right, let's start. Thermodynamics is the science of the flow of heat. So thermo is heat, and dynamics is the motion of heat. Thermodynamics was developed largely beginning in the 1800s, at the time of the Industrial Revolution. It's the taming of steel, the beginning of generating power by burning fossil fuels. So anyway, thermodynamics dates from the same period as getting fossil fuels out of the ground. It's universal. Turns out everything around us moves energy around in one way or the other. If you're a biological system, you're burning calories, burning ATP, you're creating heat. If you're a warm-blooded animal, you need energy to move your arms around and move around. Mechanical systems, obviously cars, boats, etc. And even in astrophysics, when you talk about stars, black holes, etc., you're moving energy around, you're moving heat around, and you're changing matter through thermodynamics. And the concepts of thermodynamics have even been applied to economics, systems out of equilibrium, like big companies like Enron, completely out of equilibrium, crash and burn, right? You can apply thermodynamic or non-equilibrium thermodynamics to economics.
The lecture was discussing thermodynamics, which is about transferring of heat, temperature, and their relation to energy and work. The speaker mentioned that most of the thermodynamics laws are firmly constant and unchangeable. However, there are some exceptions. He mentioned that these exceptions happen when kinetic energy of molecules takes into account, which is about the random motions of atoms. In conclusion, the lecture describes some of the thermodynamic processes.
Thirdly, life from non-living matter. And this illustration often used is the one of the monkeys at the typewriter. Okay, so we have a monkey sitting at a typewriter, and the claim here is basically if you leave chance and time long enough, you will get life. Don't worry about it. Yes, it's strange. Yes, it's wonderful. But leave enough matter, 600 million years on Earth, and you will have life. So the monkey's sitting at the typewriter, and the chances are eventually he produces the complete works of Shakespeare, so what's the problem? So there's no problem, there isn't an issue, right? You just leave him long enough, you'll be fine. And at 1 keystroke a second, the monkey might well eventually get to the complete works of Shakespeare, but he doesn't manage to do it in 600 million years. So what I decided to do to run the numbers is instead of saying type the complete works of Shakespeare, I just ran the numbers for how long would it take a monkey typing at 1 keystroke a second to type to be or not to be, that is the question, right? On average, how long is it going to take my monkey friend at 1 keystroke a second? I don't know how long you think that would be. Maybe you could have a guess. Would it be less or more than 600 million years, which is the period life on Earth is supposed to have emerged within? And when I ran the numbers, to be or not to be, that is the question, takes 12.6 trillion years to type just that phrase. And a DNA string, which you have to have for like the life we have now, doesn't emerge is not like a sentence's worth of information. A DNA string has got as much information as the Encyclopedia Britannica. Right? So if we're saying that emerged, something of that complexity emerged by chance, undirected, within 600 million years, again, it's mathematically possible, but it's so incredibly unlikely that it would have, that it tilts me in favor of the Christian story in which God creating life is simply a question of saying, let there be, and there was.
The lecture was discussing the monkey and typewriter theorem, which expressed people believe that if a monkey hitting the random key of the typewriter, a complete work of Shakespeare takes more than 600 million years, while the computer can do this within a day. The speaker concluded that this assumption is just possible in mathematics, not in reality.
Lexis IELTS and PTE. Subscribe to our channel for more informative videos.